Optimal health for high performers. This is the Health Upgrade Podcast with Dr. Nawaz Habib.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Health Upgrade Podcast. This is Dr. Habib. I've got my co-host JP with us today.
How are you?
And we are really excited to be speaking with Aly Cohen today, the author of the new book, Detoxify. This episode of the Health Upgrade Podcast is brought to you by Truvaga. Have you been looking for a simple way to feel calmer, think clearer, and sleep better? Imagine achieving this with just 2 minutes a day. I'm excited to introduce you to Truvaga, a handheld device that supports your nervous system through gentle vagus nerve stimulation. As a doctor specializing in functional health and wellness, I've seen firsthand how Truvaga has accelerated healing in my clients. I've used this device to help people with a range of issues, from sleep disturbances and heart palpitations to digestive dysfunction, nervous system imbalances, and mental wellness concerns. The results have honestly been remarkable. Truvaga is designed to catalyze and accelerate the shift in your body from fight or flight to rest, digest, and recover mode, helping you manage stress, maintain mental clarity, and unwind more easily. It's not just theory. I've witnessed its positive impact on real people facing real health challenges. The best part? Truvaga fits seamlessly into your routine. No need to carve out hours for wellness. Just 2 minutes a day can make a difference. It's a small investment of time for potentially significant benefits in how you feel and function each day. If you're curious to experience Truvaga for yourself, visit truvaga.com/upgrade. You can save $30 on your device by using the code UPGRADE30 at checkout. Remember, that's truvaga.com, truvaga.com/upgrade. It might just be the first step towards a calmer, clearer you, just as it has been for many of my clients. We're really excited to get into some of the weeds with regards to all of the toxins that our bodies are exposed to on a daily basis. And it was a really astounding experience kind of going through and learning about the 95,000 chemicals that we're exposed to that are generally approved by the government, which is just an insane stat. So, Aly, we're really excited to have you here and really dig into this topic of how to detoxify the body in the most thorough and effective way that we possibly can. So thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. And it's actually Aly, but I might as well. No, that's okay, because I think most people listening would assume it's Aly too. And, whatever. I spent a lot of my life correcting my parents' mistakes. But anyway, long story short, I'm so happy to be here. And I'm really happy to share this topic because it's taken a lot of years to get to this point where people are really listening, and I think for good reason. So thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. We're really excited to kind of dig in. And we always like to start off just understanding your journey into, and in your case, rheumatology, but getting into medicine and getting into understanding how the immune system is so important to optimal function, and what brought you to rheumatology in the first place.
Boy, that's a big question. I was destined to be a doctor because in second grade, I think I did a report on the heart, and I still have it. And I come from a family of doctors. So my dad is a nephrologist. He's 85 and still practicing even now. He's at a meeting. But he actually was one of the very few people that brought dialysis and nephrology nephrology existed, but dialysis to New Jersey in the 1970s when I was just a baby. So I used to round with him and all his patients. And, it was a really big part of our life growing up to be part of medicine in general. And now my family is all doctors. My brother works, so I had a lot of exposure to what I consider the art of medicine. But choosing rheumatology was not probably something I was planning to do. I actually always wanted to be a cardiologist. I thought the heart was pretty cool. But then I looked at lifestyle and I didn't really want to live that kind of lifestyle. And then I got into the immune system. I mean, the immune system is just so remarkably cool. And I just was taken with it. And I think like any person who goes into any field, the mentors around you, rheumatology mentors, were really remarkable at Beth Israel, New York, and Montefiore. And I think you really start to go in a direction with whom you really connect with. And they could teach you anything, but you really love what they have to say. You sort of go in that direction. So, I ended up in rheumatology and I love it. And I think it's fascinating and still evolving. I mean, that's the thing. It's still evolving. Long COVID. I mean, you name it, it is still evolving. And I think that's what keeps me on my toes and gets me up in the morning.
You're going to love this. We talk a lot about the immune system. In fact, it is kind of, we've learned to put the two together. We are very heavy, JP and I are very much on this autonomic nervous system, neuroimmune connection piece and understanding how immune system regulation takes place from a neurological standpoint. So we're going to hit it off, I think, in terms of this topic in a very unique way.
They're two sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The brain and the immune system are one and the same.
Yeah. It's so interesting how this evolved because even over the weekend, I had to catch up on tons of medical journals on the Western side of things because I'm also trained in integrative medicine, So I was reading my Western journals to apply it to the world of integrative and combine them. And there's some really great information on vagal nerve stimulation. And the studies are just remarkably interesting and, again, evolving. So
absolutely.
Cool.
You mentioned integrative medicine. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you got into integrative, and Dr. Andrew Weil being a very important part of your journey. It was actually a big part of mine as well. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. So, I was in the middle of, doing my rheumatology practice. I was working in a big rheumatology practice and I was just feeling like it wasn't enough. And I really wasn't feeling that every 15 minutes with patients was more than a conversation of really about medications, which they have their role for sure. I use them, but I was just feeling very much. And I was into running and I was getting into health. And I thought, if I'm learning all this for myself, why am I not, applying it to people I care about and want to do well? And then my husband actually stumbled across the Andrew Weil Fellowship. But what he found also was that there was a scholarship for rheumatologists only. And that's because Dr. Weil has a really strong affinity to rheumatology. And then there was a big donor in Arizona who I eventually got to meet, who was responsible for supplying those funds every year for 2 rheumatologists to be trained. I think it was 2. And I applied for that fellowship because I couldn't afford it. I was right out of training and 2 young kids. And it was, it's, why should we have to spend money on this, by the way, after training in medical school to learn material like nutrition and diet? But needless to say, I applied for the scholarship and I got it. And while I was studying there, I was learning about environmental health. And I was also in the midst of my own journey with environmental chemicals with my dog and that story. So everything sort of converged and it really filled in all the pieces that Western medicine does not offer even today. And I say that so with such sadness because we're training young people to not have some of the key tools of prevention. We've already stacked them with treatment up the yin yang, but we haven't really given them the tools that keep people healthy. And I think that that's something that they're struggling with, doctors, which I now teach 3, integrative medicine doctor groups, even University of California, Irvine on environmental health. So people are yearning, doctors are yearning and other healthcare providers. So it all just converged. My need, my interest, my frustration, and then opportunity struck and I was ready. So I think that's really what happened.
I love that. It's such a common story to hear. Like, it obviously resonated and you were having these moments in your practice speaking to patients that just were not fulfilling. You didn't feel like you were able to truly help them. Very similar to the journey that I experienced. And I really wanted to help people transform their lives. And this was like functional integrative type work really helped to solidify how we can support patients from a root cause perspective, from an optimal health kind of design. When it comes to environmental health, and in going through the book, you've done a really good job of starting to talk about and coining the term immune disrupting chemicals. And I'm going to get into what those are, or I'll let you kind of dig into those. But most people have heard of endocrine disrupting chemicals, and we tend to kind of focus on the hormonal effects. But I love that you've brought in this idea of immune disrupting chemicals, because this is truly where a lot of these environmental toxins are having their primary effect. Let's talk a little bit about how you kind of discovered this and how you've flowed through into the immune disrupting chemical area.
So when I got into environmental health, it was because very quickly my dog got sick. I was exploring why a young dog got an autoimmune disease called autoimmune hepatitis. This is 15 years ago. And I started questioning what his exposures were. And it led me to questions about human exposures. And it was in the timing of getting trained by Andrew Weil and colleagues. And so all of this stuff was building and building because they had material, Environmental Working Group had material. I was grabbing for anything I could to understand this topic. And Andrew Weil and his group was pretty much remarkable. At the same time, I was learning, as you mentioned, that most of the material, most of the peer-reviewed journals that were robust even 15 years ago were written by people called, endocrine disrupting researchers, chemical researchers. So people who are discovering, and these are academics, these aren't manufacturers, because God knows, manufacturers did not want this to come out, that you could be exposed to very low levels of chemicals that could be harmful to the human body, but lower than any of their assays and testing could detect, nor would they want to, right? So it wasn't the traditional toxicology dose makes the poison trajectory where the more you get exposed, the more you're going to experience that physiologic change. This was a discovery, and this is what threw toxicologists on their heads, was that at very, very, very low levels, like parts per million, parts per trillion, you could see the same physiologic effects. It was like a U curve or even an upside down U. So that was a really interesting area where researchers had really dove in internationally. There were studies from all over the world. And as I was learning those, I was really focusing, even my last two books, I partnered with someone named Dr. Frederick von Saal, who was literally the forefather of endocrine disrupting chemical research, because he was one of the main people, and he had colleagues, of course, that are remarkable, that really looked at bisphenol A, BPA, as the first endocrine disrupting chemical. It's, people have heard of it being taken out of baby bottles in 2012, plastic baby bottles. That was his work. And so I ended up partnering with him because he had a lot of respect for Andrew Weil. I got the book deal to write the academic book in Dr. Weil's series of wonderful books, if people want to look those up. And so I called him up along with all different people I was interviewing to try to get to partner, because Andy said to me, I want you to partner with a researcher. And I was so young and arrogant, and I was like, duh, but then I said, you know what, fine. And sure enough, it was absolutely the right decision and the right call, because I partnered with Fred von Saal, and he ended up educating me and writing and putting all of this incredible. He's an emeritus reproductive neurobiologist. He's incredibly talented into the first two books that we did for the Andrew Weil series. One was academic, one was a guidebook. And then I was talking to him when I was thinking about writing another book, and really wanted to do a book on drinking water, actually, which wasn't that sexy to publishers. And I ended up having this conversation saying, we know so much about the immune system, and we had written a little bit about it in previous books. I said, why aren't we calling them immune disrupting chemicals? And I said, I can't find anything in the medical literature saying that acronym. Like I couldn't figure it out. And he said, well, not only should it be written, you should be writing it as a rheumatologist. And if I had not gotten that blessing from him, I do not think I would be writing about this topic in such a way and giving it an acronym. So yeah, I think it's just something that people haven't shaped because they didn't feel maybe they knew the material or there was enough at the time to argue an acronym. But I think we have a lot now, clearly, to really frame not just what the chemicals do, but also what we're seeing clinically, which he was alluding to, is the fact that I'm seeing this on the ground floor. I'm seeing the epidemic rise of immune and autoimmune disorders internationally, but certainly in my own practice and even consistent with the epidemiologic literature. So it all just came together that this would be the right topic at the right time.
You mentioned BPA, and I think that's an interesting one to start with because it's one that is quite ubiquitous, and it's pretty, a lot of people don't even realize that they're being exposed to something like BPA almost all the time. And it's plastics. It's found in many plastics, hardened plastics in particular. BPA is meant to harden plastics to make it so that it's less malleable. And the idea is this is a chemical that leaches into your water. It leaches into so many different areas that you're then going to consume. And so this chemical comes into your body. What are the effects of BPA? Let's start with just BPA as a simple one. What are the effects that BPA has once it enters the body on the immune system?
So BPA was first, as you mentioned, described as a hormone disruptor, or I talked about it because it had the ability to mimic estrogen. Specifically, that's what they found in the beginning at very, very, very low levels. So it mimicked estrogen. And we knew this actually in 1936, BPA was discovered in Germany, and it was used actually early on to be given to animals, especially chickens, to grow bigger. So they got meatier if they were given BPA. Subsequently, there was medications called diethylstilbestrol, DES, that was a mimicker as well of BPA in terms of its ability to manage hormonal changes or to control or to influence. And it turned out that DES, which was used as a prescription around the world, but also in the US in the 70s, was used to prevent miscarriage, but it ended up causing successive generations of health problems in women's offspring who took it. So the women took it to prevent miscarriage, and then subsequent generations developed things like vaginal carcinoma and cardiac issues in sons. And so it was male and females. There were DES daughters and DES sons. And that's been carried out for many years of study since the original exposures that the moms experienced. So we've always known that BPA and its similar compounds really worked in a way that messed with hormones. What's so interesting is that every single immune cell in the human body actually has estrogen receptors. And I think when you understand the cross connectivity, the crosstalk between these two systems, you can't just say endocrine system does this, immune system does that, because they actually work in concert to do all the physiology that we've always assumed and believed to occur. But we silo those separately. So BPA was subsequently found to do many hormonal and also immune changes. It can increase cytokine production. It can change the kill switch, apoptosis. It can, in some ways, create what's called molecular mimicry, where the body sees chemicals or products, plastics, whatever that have BPA, among other chemicals, and it doesn't recognize its own body or antigens in the body as dissimilar. So it basically gets triggered towards self. That's how we get autoimmune diseases. There's also questions of how BPA works directly on the gut microbiome. So not just from the cellular perspective, but actually from knocking off some good microbes in the gut microbiome, which protects us. There's also evidence for regulatory T cells, which means sort of a homeostasis, a management of the immune system, also again at the cellular level. So there's all these different mechanisms, and BPA has been identified as contributing to them. But also, again, to the hormone connection, those hormone changes of the thyroid now, of hormone-sensitive cancer risks, of growth and development, fertility, have all been linked to BPA exposure. So it's just a very classic endocrine disrupting chemical, but also now an immune disrupting chemical for sure.
I think you're probably going to find that it's also having cardiovascular and neurologic effects as well. I mean, atherosclerosis and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, they're all going to end up showing a similar relationship because of that immune connection.
Well, the neuroendocrine system is another component. So you have like the immune system, you have the endocrine system, we also have the neuroendocrine system. So again, all of these things are relaying messages and signaling because that's what humans have done for millions of years of evolution. We've conserved our signals so that we don't spend extra energy, so we can save ourselves when we're at the watering pit and a hyena comes up. So we've had human evolution, conservation, and an incredible system, but it can go awry when we're now faced with modern day exposure to chemicals that the human body has never seen before. And I think that's what you have to bring in. You have to bring in anthropology to this conversation because we didn't just plop here with nice shoes and great cologne. Like we've been here. It's just our changing environment is so mucky that our body really doesn't know how to manage as well as it could and should.
Yeah, I think we've actually done a bit of a disservice in the idea of separating the body out into different systems. I think is great from a research perspective, but from a treatment and therapeutic perspective, it's actually been a disservice to allowing us to work as fully functioning, holistic humans, right?
Yeah, even from a research standpoint, it's not a good way to go. It really isn't. I mean, as soon as you isolate, even in an individual, to isolate one system and assume that what your intervention is going to do with that one system is going to have no effect on everything else, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, even medications, when they're designed for one or two outcomes in a closed system where you're looking at specific outcomes and specific side effects. Well, who's ever on one medication and who's on one medication without being on environmental chemicals as well? I mean, you're talking about a mixture of so many different components in addition to food compounds, in addition to good things, right? So we don't know how all of this kind of plays out. We know that mixtures of environmental chemicals, we call them mixture studies, has really shown a lot of not only additional additive effects of environmental chemicals, but synergizing. So they can actually make each other worse in terms of their outcomes. So, when we think about all this, instead of throwing up our hands, which I did for a while in the beginning of learning this material, I sort of turned it around and say, well, I don't like being a victim. Let's figure out how to fix this solution. And the solution is, well, let's not wait for regulation because regulation's too slow. I'll get right to that point. And let's do this for ourselves. Let's do this for ourselves. Let's figure out where these chemicals come from. Let's figure out where we can cut off from a high yield perspective. And then let's keep moving. And then let's check our hypothesis. Let's check our blood levels and our urine levels and see if this kind of makes sense. Now I don't even recommend too much testing even because I'm like, this is how we do it.
So let me ask you a question, because you've mentioned a couple of things. One is that you were learning about this at a time when you said you were hoping to become a partner, assuming that meant in your practice.
Hoping to become a partner in my practice. Did I say that? Okay.
Oh, yeah, I thought you said something to that effect. But I guess where I'm going, I was going with was that how did other people that you worked with, whether they're colleagues in a large practice or referring physicians, how did they respond to the fact that you were really questioning a lot of things that were sort of, the sacred cows of the industry and of the practice of rheumatology and medicine in general? How did that affect your relationship with them and how they viewed you? And because there's a lot of people when they go out and they sort of take this step and broaden their horizons and start to see what's really going on, it can be a shock to their own system, but it can be a shock to the system, and the system fights back. So I was just wondering how that played out for you.
Well, it's an interesting question because I'm managing some of this now, actually, with this book coming out and some of the pushback from the American Chemical Council groups and all the lobbyists. And I was hacked and I don't know if it was personal, but I think it might have been. Who knows? The world's getting hacked. But I even had a hit job podcast that I was not happy about, that I didn't even realize they were throwing a toxicologist who's paid for by the industry in with me to go at it for 2.5 hours. And boy, that was pretty remarkable. But and I held my own, but I'm telling you, it's all in the editing, as you guys know. So, it's one of those things where, first of all, in the beginning, I was so part of the system of believing in my father, in medicine, in the hierarchy, in the old school. I mean, I remember the doctors that were 100 years old on rounds. And it was like, I really believe in that system of education. And so it was not easy to pull myself out of feeling, am I being wronged? Like, where is this coming from? I think because, and Navaz, I think you know this, because I had a community of people who were doing this questioning with me. And I had such respect for Dr. Weil and all of his colleagues who are MD PhDs that had already, kind of blazed the path. I felt so much less worried about having a community. And in my local practice, I was working for another rheumatologist at the time. I was young. I was out of practice, out of training. I didn't question. I didn't make too many moves. I didn't have the power, nor did I even care. And I ended up leaving at the right time and starting my own practice because at that point I had gotten so much great training from the Western world. I felt like I could move on. But, naivete is such a great thing. Because when you don't know that people are coming at you and you just surround yourself by people, you go where the love is, it is remarkable how much shit you can get done. Because I will tell you, if I didn't have Fred von Saal and his, community that he invited me into, or else I wouldn't have been invited. And then I had this integrative program that I felt really supported by. I was reading the literature and I depend on science to formulate my own brain and opinions. I didn't really have a system that worked against me in the immediate area. So, my hospital system, I didn't really care if they agreed or not. I was just doing good medicine. I was a good rheumatologist and still am. So I was doing my job. But I just think that it's funny how when you get, you keep going and you don't know how to fail because you've never experienced this stuff before. You just keep going. And it's only at this moment where I'm about to publish a book that I'm starting to see the pushback a little bit here and there. It's a crazy time in politics, as we know. And I think that there are things to embrace in terms of the intention. I don't know how we're going to go about doing that, seeing what I'm seeing, but I encourage regulation. I just say don't wait for it because I don't care who's in power. I don't care who's head of HSS or president. It doesn't matter. I've been through multiple presidents already on both sides of the aisle. And it's still too slow, these changes. Red dye number 3, 1 year. And then, 6 PFAS chemicals in the water system possibly being removed when there are 15,000 of them. It doesn't make sense to me in the scan of one human's lifespan that it's going to do any good unless we do this for ourselves. And we take agency over our body and we change our own destiny of our health. That's really what I believe.
Yeah, there's no question. There's no question that we have to do it ourselves because you're right. The wheels of regulation move extremely slowly. They're rusted solid. Personally, I am taking heart that some of these things are being highlighted now, largely in social media. And it does seem like we have leadership in the health area that is ready to make at least some moves. The generally regarded as safe loophole seems like it's going to get plugged. And, that's a start. But I like the grassroots movements that are calling for the changes in the neurotoxic dyes that are in kids' foods, things like that as well. But let's dive back into the science for a moment and, talking about the fact that our environment is filled with these chemicals. I mean, it's been hundreds, plural, of years of non-natural chemicals being made by the chemical industries. Even back in the 1800s, the Germans were learning how to make all sorts of different chemicals. They sort of spawned the industry. And now we're living in this environment. How do you, the title of your book is Detoxify, how do we look at the various different categories of chemicals and how do we detoxify? Because now we don't just have organic chemicals, we now have, biologics and proteins that are being injected into enzyme detergents, et cetera. How do we detoxify our bodies from all of these assaults that we're getting that are not natural, that weren't at the watering hole when the hyenas were coming up to us?
For sure. I mean, and you said hundreds of years of exposure to, or at least of the inventions. I'd push back and say they were being invented, but they weren't being distributed. And the fact that we have so much distribution globally by all of the mechanisms we have all these Amazon and shipping, and we have open trade, well, maybe not for a while, but the idea is that they created these chemicals. They mostly remained in very small environments of research. And it just exploded after World War II. I mean, that's when we had the pesticides with soldiers overseas and rayon and naugahyde and plexiglass and things to reduce use of natural resources, things to make aircraft lighter, like the plexiglass. The list goes on. And for all good intention, everyone was happy about all this, right? Plastics that didn't let dishes break and 50s moms that were so thrilled about not cleaning up the dishes. So there was all this social and, military movement, to be honest with you. And, it's become such a wild, wild west. There's no regulation in the US market for any of these chemicals, any of them. I mean, it's remarkable when I say that. I just, spoke to my kids' high school, which was a thrill in and of itself, but I was trying to tell them over and over again, the key point here is that nothing's regulated. Nothing's regulated. Whatever you put on your body, whatever you eat, pretty much nothing's regulated. We have organic and we have the FDA, and that's it. That's it. And this is why it's valuable to know that. And I think that because it's such a big topic, it took me 15 years to get here. It took me multiple classes of tryouts of high school and college and doctors. It took so much time to put this in categories that even I could wrap my head around. So what I talked about in the book, what I created was the 4 A's of environmental health navigation. And it was just to simplify, into something we could all bite off and really chew here. So the 4 A's are very simple. So the first A is assess. So I have a 50 question survey that I think it's a very reasonable 50 questions that anyone could wrap their head around about, do you use dry cleaning? Do you filter your water? What kind of, do you check up your personal care products? And you're basically just, no judgment. You're just putting a 1 or a 0, and then you basically add up those numbers to see where you're starting from, So you want to assess the problem so you know where you can actually make a change, right? The second A is avoid, and in parentheses, swap, so that you can avoid some of the chemicals that we don't even need, that we've been marketed to. 100 cleaners in your kitchen: sink cleaner, drain cleaner, oven cleaner, surface cleaner, window cleaner. I mean, give me a break, right? So I think you need to assess first, and then avoid what you don't need, and then swap what you think you want or you need. And that way there's resources for looking up products for cleaning and for makeup and for all of these things that you want to keep in your life. And there are plenty of options. The third A is add. And this brings in a lot of integrative medicine as well as just, human physiology, adding in filtered water, adding in organic food or foods that you can wash with baking soda and vinegar that are cleared of pesticides and farming chemicals, adding in sweating, adding in sauna, adding in sleep, which has the lymphatic system and how we really harness human physiology to help remove these chemicals, but also really supporting our detoxification systems, our liver, our kidney, our skin, our lymphatic system. So adding has so much to do with bolstering the human at the cellular level and helping us thrive through anthropology and what our bodies have needed. And then the last A is going to, take into account my colored hair and my kids on the lacrosse field, which is you have a fluidity of life that you can't always control your environment. You can't always be perfect. You can't, you may want to color your hair like I do. You may want to, eat birthday cake and travel and not have access to certain things you're used to or want. The idea is to keep you motivated because you're not supposed to be perfect. This is a big topic and everyone is on their own journey, and it's to empower you to keep going. So that was my 4 A's. And I broke up the book in those sections and have a 21-day plan also for getting started right at the end of it when you get some knowledge in the background.
This is so powerful. And the first, usually about 3 to 4 weeks when I'm working with the client, are spent focused on identifying, assessing, addressing the detoxification system, because we are so bombarded, I think is the right word here, by all of these immune disrupting chemicals, all of these toxins that we're allowing into our body that we don't even realize we're being exposed to all the time. The first step is, can we eliminate or try to reduce our exposures to all of these challenges? And that's why I think your book outlines it in such a beautiful way and really pulling together this 21-day plan. And you've kind of even broken down that plan into the first week. Let's assess exactly what's going on. Let's identify where these challenges are, right? Go look in the cleaning cupboard. Make sure that you're utilizing as natural products as possible. Let's start making those swaps. Let's be proactive on an individual basis and not wait for government regulation to really plug that in. So thank you for kind of putting that together in a friendly user manual, I think is the best way to put this.
For a topic like this, it's keep it simple, stupid. I talk to 7th graders and I talk to doctors, physicians with PhDs, and it's the same topic. It's how is it presented in a way that reaches them, because we're all as ignorant as possible on this topic. I was for many years, and now I'm starting to build on. I just don't want people to wait 15 years to get the tools they need.
So one of the things that you bring up and brought up just now as you went through the 4 A's is ways that you can amplify your own ability. There's another A word. Amplify your own ability to detoxify. Things like sauna and sweating and hydration and sleep. These are all really powerful tools because our bodies are capable of breaking down. I mean, we have this, the cytochrome P450 cascade in the liver is a perfect example of something that Mother Nature has given us that allows us to break down foreign chemicals. It allows us to detoxify our bodies, but we have to make certain that our bodies are functioning well. So being in shape, making certain that we're not poisoning ourselves with sugar. We got to make certain that our endocrine system, even though it may be under assault, it's not under assault by things that we're doing voluntarily that we know we shouldn't be. So what are some of the really most powerful ways that people can ensure that they're amplifying their own ability to detoxify?
And one of the key things, thank you for asking, one of the key things that I also didn't hit on that list, which is so critical, is nutrition, because there are now so much data and information, which I talk about in the book, where certain food groups, certain, B9, folic acid, omega-3 fatty acids, quercetin, antioxidants, fiber to bind chemicals, all of those are very, very much whole foods, right? We get them from our whole food diet, whether it's, Mediterranean, which is the most well-studied, the most anti-inflammatory in terms of its macros. But needless to say, these are whole foods. These aren't processed or ultra-processed foods. But there are certain components of these whole foods that actually offset things like epigenetic methylation and histone changes at the cellular level. And explaining that is not easy. And I remember having to take out a lot of what I thought was really cool stuff that no one would understand. But the idea is that, we have this remarkable science now that shows that what we eat in terms of its quality, not just pesticide free, which of course is reasonable, but its nutritional compound value has to offset environmental chemical changes at the epigenomic, above the gene level. And so nutrition, where food is medicine, is applying directly at environmental health and chemical exposures. So adding in cruciferous vegetables, for instance, when you're upregulating stage 2 conjugation, cytochrome P450 system, we are feeding the liver its nutrients. And I call this fertilizer. I call this human fertilizer. And I list 4 specific things that I think every human should be on. That's very reasonable. But I also say that this is another component of fertilizer that's helping our liver do its job better, especially under assault from environmental chemicals. So, all the cruciferous vegetables, sulforaphane, and all the sulfur-laden foods, alliums, like onions and scallions, all of those things are remarkably good for the human body, but particularly the detoxification processes. I talk about dandelion roots. I talked about the lymphatic system and jumping on a trampoline, how such minimal amount of effort can actually get your body flowing and doing the kind of work it really craves. So there's just so many options depending on what people are into, but I think that's a really important thing about food is medicine. I also would say drinking water is medicine. I think that's really missed. Like I said, I wish I could write a book on water, but people would just run to the back and get the punchline and not read the book. And so, but water is just so critical to this detoxification process. If we're drinking filthy water, and people don't even realize it's filthy in the US, we're not a third world country, but we're not far off. And because our laws are 50 years old that cover the Safe Drinking Water Act, that covers all 160,000 wastewater treatment plants that serve 85% of the US population's drinking water, if we don't get this right, I don't see how detoxifying by having a great diet or doing a Whole30 or whatever things people do is going to make sense when we're made up of 85% water. So these are the kinds of things I try to teach young people as well, because, their whole life is about to start. And, we need to be thinking about how do you feed your body like you would a plant?
Water is foundational. I think that's so relevant. And you really did. There's a good chunk of the book talking about water and how we can improve water. And you mentioned reverse osmosis being a really useful tool in that process. Talk a little bit about what is removed when that reverse osmosis process is utilized effectively from just regular tap water.
So I'll start with a fun fact that I learned from my dad, the nephrologist. Well, it turns out that nephrologists and dialysis machines back from the 70s, when they were first invented, they require water, but they require super, super clean water because these folks, these patients tend to be the most immune compromised, many of them, from their chronic health issues and their chronic kidney disease. So they required reverse osmosis water back in the 70s when it was first created at an industrial level, these machines. And they're huge tanks. And it was really, again, just for infection purposes, right? Smallest celled organisms, single-celled organisms like viruses and bacteria were supposed to be caught in this really, really tight material that has pore size so tiny you can't even imagine. Well, it turns out that all these other compounds that were created after the fact are getting caught in this also, getting caught in this material. But I have not been promoting RO for a long time because I waited until the price points started to come down to such a level where it made sense to tell people you really should be getting a RO filter because they're accessible. They're $275. You can have one on your counter. You can have one underneath your counter. It's easier with the plumber that costs $150 for an hour to put in. Like I literally timed my plumber in my office 1 hour. 1 hour for that local plumber to come in, split the water line, put it in and leave. And I was thrilled to do it because then I knew it could be done. So, the idea that it's so accessible, all filtration, I will say, is better than none. I mean, I don't want to poo-poo anyone's efforts on the pitcher or on the faucet, which are a carbon block, or on the refrigerator door. None of that is a problem to me, except for the fact that when you know better, you do better. When you can afford more, you might be able to do more. And the whole concept of renters not being able to put these in, I fight back on that. That's not true. For a lot of these, landlords, you take it with you when you leave these systems. So long story short, I gave a lot of great ideas for people to consider the most aggressive way that we now have to clean drinking water in the US market, how to figure out what to buy, and then, basically how to make it seamless so people can enjoy that. But there's all types of filtration I talk about as well.
Is there any issue when it comes to reverse osmosis with remineralization? Because we do demineralize the water a little bit with the RO process. Is there any concern on the remineralization piece?
So the answer is water was not meant for nutrition. So I don't really care how much is taken off of it because you can't take off just, a mineral or leave a mineral and keep a PFAS going out or a lead. It doesn't know anything but size, right? So if it's by size, you can't really predict what's going to be removed. And if minerals are removed, I can guarantee there's far less minerals that your body needs than the number of toxic compounds your body does not need. And so you're really removing the baby with the bathwater for good reason. And then you have that water with a nice salad and maybe take some of your human fertilizer supplements that I talk about in the book that are necessities, and you go on with your day. But for sure, you can get also remineralization systems, but I don't even know who decides what and how much. If you're drinking a lot per day, then you may overdo it and you can get, in trouble. There's even, issues with chronic kidney disease patients who drink, some of these mineralized compounds that are added and they get too much sodium. So you have to be thinking a little bit along the lines of, get it naturally, let your body figure it out as best it can.
I was just going to say, if you're sweating a lot and you're in the sauna, don't worry about the sodium. Take a pinch of Celtic sea salt and put it in the water, just enough that you're not really going to taste it, but add those minerals right back.
Great. That's healthy Gatorade I just tell everyone, and I think it's in the book as one of my recipes because I don't like to cook. It's basically reverse osmosis water, 3 ounces of a juice or lemon juice or anything to cover a little salt. And then that little, like you said, you could do Himalayan, you can do kosher, you can do unprocessed Celtic sea salt, which has all these electrolytes, which are the basis of a sports drink without all of those added chemicals.
Yeah,
and
that's
sugars.
a perfect way.
Yeah, sugar's the best.
And dyes.
Can't be so, come on now. We got to have a little sugar in that drink just to keep us going. Just don't.
I always think it's hilarious when we, and it's kind of sad when we take a salad or the components of a salad and we go to wash off the pesticides on that salad with the water that is unfiltered in the tap. Yes, we may be getting a little bit reduction in the pesticides, but who knows what we're adding when we're not utilizing filtered water to support that cleaning process.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. On the go, sometimes I'll just run it through tap water, my organic berries, just because I'm late and I got to go, and I just dry it off. But, like I said, if you can do 80-20 and you can manage your life, there's no thing here. I'm a realist, not a purist. I mean, I have 2 kids. I'm busy. Everyone's busy. Everyone's trying to survive. The way I see it is you do the best you can under, like, for instance, I'll give an example. So, and I have so many examples. I wonder if I have more in the book, but long story, my kid just went on a trip to visit a college with my husband. And, just like lacrosse tournaments and all these other weekend trips, I bought a 3-gallon, stainless steel water cooler or water holder, and I basically filled it up with all my filtered water. Less microplastics, less spending for plastic bottles. just a super way to just buy something that's not even that expensive, but have it moving forward. You're layering in successful trials. You're layering those in. And then pretty soon you have a pretty good repertoire of things you're doing that makes sense.
I love it. That makes so much sense. And yeah, realism over purism, I think, is a really important thing to bring in, because otherwise people feel like if you're not doing anything, then you're not going to do it at all. Our bodies are built to be able to handle toxins, maybe not at the level that we are exposing it to, but we should be capable of handling 20%, not the 100% that we're currently exposing ourselves to. So this makes a lot of sense to me. I have 2 kids. I get it. We're always on the go.
I got 4. I'm playing zone. Trust me.
Yeah,
It's
I don't know
impossible.
how he's doing
It's
it.
impossible. Well, it's interesting, but as they get older, they get more attuned to it, aware of the issues, and or at least that's how it's going in my house. And I'm really proud of my oldest, who's taken it upon herself to really adopt a lot of the things that we talk about in the house, that we talk about on the podcast and that I'm writing about. She's starting to listen. It's amazing. As my dad.
Well, tell my boys, because they didn't get the memo.
Well, the older, as my dad used to say, the older you get,
I'm cool. That's it.
yeah. Well, the older, my dad used to say, the older they get, the smarter I get.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
You have to, right? You have to adapt. Talk a little bit about how you talk to kids about this, because I think a lot of people or parents are listening to our podcast and they want to maybe share some of these important tips with their kids. You said your son's going off to university, to college, like living on his own. What are some of the things that you can make recommendations to? And I know JP has a daughter going to college as well.
Yeah.
So
tell me now.
So the thing is, I will say this. I think for the most part, like with so many things, they learn from example for their whole lives up until this point. So you just hope you did well. You hope you gave them what they needed to make smart decisions, which is questionable at best. And then they go on their own. Listen, when I've been teaching high school on and off, and even middle school a little bit here and there, just every opportunity I get, they, first of all, they ask the best questions. They're so real and they're so frank about everything. And I think you just got to give it back to them the same exact way. My kids my boys walk around with their cell phones in their front pocket because they don't like the back pockets, and they're all wearing sports shorts. So I'm constantly teaching them about airplane mode. I'm constantly telling them that I want to be a grandmother one day. And your so to speak, your parts are going in a microwave every time you put your phone next to your genitals, or I even said at their school, I said, I walk through your school and you guys all have your laptops sitting right on your groin. I'm like, I don't even know what's going on there, because that heat and that radiation is something no one wants. Just put it on a table, put it on a chair. And, also my youngest, he was really into cologne, and, they're swapping colognes. And look, I always say it's not crack, right? They're not doing drugs in the hallways. They're swapping colognes, and they're not allowed to get colognes. And I see them stashing and all that. Look, lots of problems with phthalates and colognes. It keeps the fragrance lasting longer. They're proprietary blends. I can go on and on and on trying to tell people to try to avoid perfume or fragrance in a label, whether it's, home personal care or cleaning or what have you. But what I did was my son wanted to go to summer camp and have all these products. These kids love the products, right? Teenagers use the most personal care products in a 24-hour period than any other demographic. So this is why I focus a lot on the hormone disruption and EDCs and getting this into high schools. It's such a perfect demographic for them to learn. And I said to my son, listen, you can get any products you want within reason. I said, but they have to be listed a 2 or a 1 on EWG or EWG certified. And you can do the same thing with Yucca or Clearia or Think Dirty apps. These are free apps. EWG is Environmental Working Group, wonderful organization. And they have the EWG.org website, which is loaded with great information. They also have what's called the Healthy Living app. So the kid gets on, they're savvier than we all are with technology. And he's going through, and in 2 seconds, he finds 10 products he wants. Then I had to negotiate that down. But the idea is that he's now teaching his friends. And after that assembly, by the way, all of them were going up to my boys and really picking their brains and making fun, but not making fun. They heard it. They heard what I said. And that's how I know that this is possible. Because if we teach young people who may one day have kids, who may be able to educate their world, that's where we have to kind of, at least I'm trying to focus next on that demographic for sure.
I love that. These apps and the use of environmental working group resources, which by the way are phenomenal. So anybody who's interested, go and take a look. Even just something as simple, and you did point it out in the book, the dirty dozen and the clean 15. Like, just if you're going to focus on the 80-20 rule and doing your best when you're choosing organic, then choose organic, particularly for that dirty dozen list, right? I think it just makes so much more sense to work smart. And the smart human is your moniker. I love it, by the way. Work smarter, right? Like, let's try to figure out smart ways to do it. And we have these apps now available where you go and scan a barcode and it tells you, yeah, this is full of crap, and you want to maybe find something that's a better swap or a better option, right? So,
or frozen organics is one of the most undervalued concept for food. We all grew up thinking fresh was better, but for many of us who don't have farmers markets, or don't live in an area where there's organic farming, or don't have a relationship with your farmer to learn more about how they farm, frozen USDA organics, which has the seal, which I talk about in the book, different labeling and how to understand and decode some of these, codes within a supermarket. But frozen USDA organic produce is so pervasive. It's part of every big box store across the US. So you really reduce the accessibility issues. Plus, they're loaded with nutrition because they're flash frozen, as opposed to our fresh organics that are in the supermarket that travel for weeks. So understanding the modern day food system helps us make better choices too, not just understanding that chemicals are a lot of different places, but how to navigate and conquer the food system in a way that gets your body healthier. To me, that makes all the sense in the world. You just have to know some very simple things that, we share in the book. My cat and I share in the book.
I love it. You mentioned in the book there are 25 recipes, and there's other great options in terms of swaps and how to utilize better cleaning tools or cleaning products in the house, better personal care products, or things that you can use as nice substitutes or alternatives. Let's talk about, what are your top 3 kind of swaps or easy things that people can generally do outside of the reverse osmosis options for your water? What are the top 3 detoxifying foods, tools, supports that you can make?
Yeah. So right off the bat, I would say getting rid of plastics, because the plastics in our Tupperware, we don't need them. We don't need plastics to store food. We don't need plastics to carry water and drinking water. We don't need plastic water bottles. If we can remove plastics, that's not just taking away microplastics and nanoplastics. It's also taking away some of the chemicals that ride along with those plastics that are infused into plastics. So I think when we kind of clear house with plastics, which is not unheard of for most people to hear that, I think that's a really simple way to start. Get a bunch of glass, get a couple stainless steel pans, clean up your cookware, because that's an area that people don't always think about adds chemicals to their diet and into their body. The water situation is, listen, you can save for an RO filter. That is great. But you may want to just simply, do a pitcher for the short term and plan out something bigger. But anything you can do to prevent some of those chemicals from tap water. And also when you're traveling, and I post on the Smart Human on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and all that, when I film myself in an airport, you're given a million options for water bottles, but guess what? Water has ingredients on the water bottle. And if you look at the ingredients, which no one would bother to look, including myself, it'll tell you how that water's cleaned. Is it distilled? Is it reverse osmosis? So maybe you can't get rid of all the microplastics from the bottle, but you can control how that water was originally cleaned to be put into the water, so into the bottle. So there's all these really interesting hacks. So like I said, get rid of plastics, think about your water, choose USDA organic food whenever you can. It's not perfection, but whenever you can, including frozens, including farmers markets and whatever you have access to, because those are huge inputs, water, food. And then I think when you have the time, starting to think about what you put on your skin, which is certainly another route into the body, but also feminine care products. So I really direct this to women who are exposed to so many chemicals at such young ages, particularly African-American women, that we really need to be thinking about the products that we put in our bodies, and actually tampons and all the feminine care products, really important route of entry into the human body. We design medications like estradiol to put in there to get absorbed quickly. We got to think about chemicals that we put in there with products that will also get into our body very quickly, and really is changing the landscape of breast cancer risk. So it's just another thing to start thinking about in, on, and around your body, in what you eat and drink, on what you put on your skin. And around is very simple also, is air quality. Get rid of air fresheners, candles, all of these synthetic candle stuff that we breathe in. We don't need it. And we can also find very safe alternatives, open windows, plants, that kind of thing. So those are the biggies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And once you cleanse your surroundings of those, especially the fragrances, I find the older I get, the more intolerant I am of them. They really, across the board, they just smell
terrible. Through my kitchen in the morning on the way to school.
Driving kids to school in the morning.
And I
themselves in it.
And not only that, the animals now, they hug the animals, and then the animals reek of cologne. And now, mind you, I did a really cool, there's companies now that make really clean fragrance, and they're unisex, right? They're not just even for men and women anymore, which is kind of cool because they smell great no matter what. So I ordered some of the clean ones, and my son and I did a sort of smell testing thing. And we both picked out one we liked, and I let him order it. And I ordered one. The idea is he needs to know there are options, even though he doesn't always choose them. It's about, not fighting with him. It's just about sharing with him. And he's starting to make much better choices by not being aggressive with him. And I think that's kind of parenting 101 I'm learning. But the outcomes is that, I think they're starting to, I catch them making choices that I wouldn't even expect.
I like the idea of options.
Is this the son that's on his way to college?
The one who's on to college, he doesn't love cologne. He doesn't love to shower either. But, this is a thing that's pervasive. He's getting better. And the younger one is the one who is really into sort of the products and all that. But they're both into it. I mean, they both want to look good. They both want to feel good. It's a very vulnerable age, and I think it's the perfect timing to get into their brain. That's the thing. It is the perfect timing because they are vulnerable. They are tech savvy. They are going to potentially have kids one day. So you're getting fed in at an early age. I think that's what I'm hoping to do next.
Fighting. Just make certain they're on the right social media sites that are promoting the things that you are talking about, as opposed to just trying to pump them filled with products.
I went off on TikTok at their high school. I was like, come on. And I think that's how you have to talk to them. Be frank with them. At least that's my experience. You guys are parents, but I just feel like they see through BS so quickly and so easily that if you're just not honest and frank with them and transparent, they tune you out. And then you can't get into the bigger stuff into their head, really important stuff.
So that's what you have to look forward to, Navaz.
Yeah, I'm a few years behind you guys, so I'm taking this all in and saying,
what are you talking about?
My kids are almost 8 and 4, so I've got a way to go. So I'm going to take all this in.
18, 17 as of tomorrow, 15 and 13. I've got all 4 of them are teenagers. So yeah, right. It's a nightmare.
I count myself lucky now.
Living the dream one nightmare at a time. So, wow.
I'm going to give you one more shout out on the book here. This is the book, Detoxify. It was just absolutely wonderful. There's tons of great resources, great stories with regards to some of the patients that you had wonderful interactions with, and how you your thought process, which I think is so interesting for people to understand. Like, what's the thought process of a doctor that understands these issues, for them to go through and assess really what's going on an individual basis and provide recommendations that people can take on. And really, a lot of this is DIY work, right? It doesn't require working with a practitioner to assess your home cleaning stuff and your personal care products. Doing that is 90% of the work, right? Is find out where you're actually getting exposure from, and then doing the work to make those changes. And
how that plays into your illness. Because as you said, you just hit something in my brain. We don't want to have to rely on even necessarily integrative and functional doctors or holistic. We don't want to rely on anyone where we're spending a fortune for testing when we should be spending that money on the doing, on the solutions. And I really believe that, because I get so many patients who have lost so much money in the process. I'm not saying this is the end all be all. People don't need meds. People don't need doctors. For sure, I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying if, in terms of scalability, it's just impossible to serve so many people. And when you hear about these patients that are very typical, I'm sure typical of yours as well, very typical patients that come in at younger ages with autoimmune diseases that they shouldn't really ever be experiencing, like my dog was. But they're also with people who have no family history. So these are de novo cases of immune and autoimmune conditions that really should not be existing. But because We have, real basic information on what affects your gut, what affects your risks, and how to feel better overall, because a lot of them feel lousy or else they wouldn't come in. I think it's a really simple way to get started and to really see and we have a symptom tracker. How do things fall off from how you feel? My migraines went away because I was eating so much cleaner because there's so many chemicals that contribute to migraines. It's just simple as sort of pulling things away and seeing what's left. And if what's left is important and scary or not solved, you dig deeper with medicine and Western medicine as well.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point. Now, I just want to drive it home. I know you both have said it, but you got people out there who really don't have the education. They don't have the knowledge. They have the will, and they have the motivation because they're not feeling well. So take that motivation, take that will, become educated by reading books like Detoxify, talking to people, listening to podcasts like this. Take that knowledge and, as you said, DIY it. Okay, be a little bit of a biohacker and do a little work yourself. And you're going to find actually within a very short period of time, chances are you're going to become more knowledgeable than 90% of the physicians out there that you're going to deal with, unless you're going to somebody who is an integrative medicine practitioner who has taken the time to think through something beyond the one organ that they went to study in residency. And, even in med school, they start to track them at this point. So you say, if you got problems with your stomach, well, the chances are it's not just confined to your stomach. It could be kidney related. It could be liver related. It could be brain related. It's a whole system. And once you start realizing that you can have the power to heal yourself, then it motivates you.
For sure. And I think that's the thing. People just aren't feeling well these days. I mean, there's emotional, there's psychological, there's economic, there's so much going on. But truly, to start in a way that doesn't cost a lot of money, just takes a little bit of thought and a little reasonable, practical changes, to me has always been the method to get started. And it doesn't take away from Western medicine. It doesn't take away from my medical colleagues, who I respect greatly. It's a matter of how do we do this process in a way that helps more people at the starting point than waits until they get sicker and need more, oversight and treatment.
I think the way to make health scalable is for people to be empowered to do a lot of the work themselves. And I just want to end with like a friend of mine, I believe he's a friend of yours as well, Sachin Patel, who mentioned, and his kind of overall moniker of everything health related is that the doctor of the future is the patient themselves, that we should be empowered to take on a lot of that, even if it's 50, 60, 70% of the work should be in assessing, addressing, identifying, and creating those swaps for the toxic burden that we are unknowingly creating within our body. And a lot of what we're challenged with will actually go away because we're able to identify and be aware of these things and not have them burden our health to the level that they currently are. Any final thoughts as we wrap up our wonderful podcast episode with you?
I need an organic drink if you really want to get me started. And I do drink organic beer, believe it or not. Not often, but I do enjoy it because I feels cleaner and it's available. Final thoughts, first of all, I appreciate what you guys do as well. This takes a village. This whole promotion of a book, it's really more about getting this material out there, giving birth to something that may not be what people have ever experienced before. It takes a village, and, talking with intelligent people like yourselves, sharing really, important information, I think is how we move the ball down the field. And, 10 years ago, this would not have been a normal. It's hard enough to get this conversation in now, but can you imagine what it was like 10 years ago? How lonely I was in the kitchen looking at my dog and my cat going, what? So I think that we've come a long way. Now the question is, how do we do it well? How do we do it without too much TikToking and bad medicine and over testing and scare tactics? That's the point. We got to do it in a way that's not taking advantage of people's fear or desperation. And I think that's a challenge of integrity and credibility. And I think the people who are on board with this get that. And so anyway, I appreciate you sharing this material with your community.
Of course. JP, any final thoughts?
I just love the fact that we're teaching people how to fish. That's what we need to do. Teach them to fish, and they'll be alive and healthy for the rest of their lives.
That's correct. Don't give them the fish, give them the fishing rod for sure. Yep. I love that. So that's
Exactly.
great.
Well, this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Aly, for joining us. This was a lot of fun. We got to talk about immune system, and we got to talk about real tools that people can implement into their daily lives just right off the bat. And I highly, highly recommend for anybody who's interested in identifying the challenges that are in your body. I'm holding up the copy of my book for those who are listening on audio.
And I was going to mention one more thing. If people are interested in following on social media, it's The Smart Human, but thesmarthuman.com, which is my website really for education, has courses, which I've now been uploading, like a course on pesticides that's easy and reasonable, drinking water, any number of things. Integrative rheumatology is up there. I teach pharmacists now. So there's a course for pharmacists to learn about integrative medicine and understand. So everything I can think of that I can teach, I'm putting in, reasonable courses on thesmarthuman.com. So please check it out if you're interested. Otherwise, just maybe follow on social media too, if you're interested.
Absolutely. You're going to get great info, whether you're just following or you're able to go and check out The Smart Human. The book comes out on May 6th. Amazing. Pre-order your copy today. Order it if it's after the 6th. And thank you, Aly, again, so much for joining us and for sharing your wonderful knowledge and the desire to empower people to take control of their health and feel upgraded.
Thank you both for having me. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure.
If you got to this point in the podcast, please share this episode with one person who you think could utilize this information to upgrade their health. And we will catch you all on the next one.